The first time Elias realized the galaxy was far stranger than any training simulation. It wasn't during battle, or under the thunder of warship cannons, or while watching alien blood freeze into crystal shards in vacuum. It was in a quiet medical corridor lit by soft violet light, where a frightened alien girl trembled as if the universe itself had turned against her. Elias was a human soldier, officially listed as support security aboard the coalition warship Valiant Resolve. Unofficially, he was what humans always became in foreign stars: a fixer, a witness, a man who saw suffering and could not walk past it. She was small compared to the towering species that ruled the vessel. Her skin a pale opalescent blue that shifted gently with her breathing. Eyes too large for her delicate face, filled with a fear that felt ancient, layered, learned over generations. She wore the simple white wraps of a diplomatic ward. Yet there was something restrained in her posture, like royalty forced to kneel. They met because Elias was assigned to guard the medical wing after a skirmish with raiders, because treaties demanded human presence to make things look neutral, because fate has a cruel sense of humor. She dropped a data slate when she saw him, fingers shaking, breath hitching, expecting punishment. "It's okay," Elias said softly, raising his hands in the universal human gesture of peace. His voice steady even though something in his chest tightened. "I won't hurt you." She stared, confused by the words, startled by the tone, as if kindness itself was a foreign language. Most species didn't bother learning human emotional nuance. They saw humans as loud, violent, unpredictable, good for war and little else. But she listened, and slowly, painfully slowly, she relaxed. Her name, whispered after minutes of silence, was Liara. Not a title, not a rank, just a name which in itself felt like a rebellion. Over the following days, Elias found excuses to be near the medical wing, to check doors that didn't need checking, to stand where he could see her, hear her voice, watch her curiosity flicker when he spoke about Earth, about rainstorms, about food grown in dirt instead of nutrient vats. Liara listened like someone starving, not for food, but for the idea that the universe could be gentle. What Elias didn't know was that Liara was an alien princess, last surviving heir of the Elthari Dominion. A species bound by one of the oldest laws in the galaxy. A law written not in ink but in biology and fate. Among the Elthari, emotional bonding triggered genetic convergence. Touch was sacred, intimacy was irreversible, and a kiss, a genuine kiss born of compassion and intent, was not affection, it was a binding act. Liara knew this, which is why she tried to stay distant. But humans were dangerous in ways no alien law had prepared for. They smiled without dominance, touched without ownership, cared without expectation. The day it happened was after a nightmare. Liara woke screaming in the medical bay, memories of her homeworld burning, her family executed under false charges of treason, her people scattered or enslaved under coalition law that claimed protection but delivered silence. Elias rushed in before protocol allowed it, sat beside her bed without asking permission, held her shaking hands while she cried in a way her species was taught never to show. "You're safe," he murmured, voice low and real. "I'm here." She looked at him then, truly looked, not as a human, not as a soldier, but as a soul standing between her and oblivion, and she kissed him. It was brief, trembling, confused, and deeply human in its clumsiness. Elias froze, stunned more by the emotion than the act. His heart pounding like he had just survived combat. Liara pulled back instantly, horror flooding her features as realization struck like a blade. She fled the ward before Elias could speak, before questions could form, leaving him standing alone with a strange warmth on his lips and a growing sense that something irreversible had occurred. The next morning, the Valiant Resolve dropped out of hyperspace under emergency alert. Alarms howled through steel corridors, red lights pulsing like a war drum. External sensors detected an incoming fleet. Elthari warships, ancient, elegant, and armed beyond modern coalition limits. At their center was a royal carrier broadcasting a single encrypted message. "By ancient law of blood and bond, the princess returns. She brings the child of union. The human is to be claimed." Gasps echoed through command decks. Diplomats paled. Admirals demanded explanations they already feared. Elias stood on the observation deck as the first Elthari vessel emerged from fold space. his reflection staring back at him in the glass, tired eyes, scarred face. A soldier who thought he understood war. He had no idea the battle ahead would not be fought with weapons, but with law, destiny, and a child that would change the fate of two species forever. The warship did not fire, it did not posture or threaten. It simply waited, vast and patient like a judgment already decided. Its hull etched with symbols older than the coalition itself. Symbols that predated human spaceflight, predated treaties, predated mercy. Elias felt the weight of it pressing against his chest as if the void itself leaned closer. The command deck around him buzzing with tension. Officers whispering behind hands, translators scrambling through ancient dialects, admirals staring at data streams that confirmed what no one wanted to say aloud. The L3 had returned, and they had returned for him. Liara appeared on the main holo without warning, her image projected in towering clarity. Regal posture restored, yet eyes still carrying the quiet storm he recognized. Her skin glowed softly under ceremonial light, her robes woven with royal sigils that spoke of authority the coalition could not legally ignore. "By the law of convergence," she said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "I invoke my right of claim." The words rippled through the chamber like a blade through water. The coalition legal counsel protested immediately, citing consent, ignorance, human jurisdiction, but their arguments sounded thin even to themselves, because ancient law carried weight in ways modern politics could not unravel. Liara's gaze shifted then, and found Elias. For a moment the galaxy fell away, leaving only the memory of trembling hands and a kiss born of fear and hope. "I did not intend to bind him," she continued, pain flickering across her features. "But the bond was accepted, the child formed, and fate does not undo itself for convenience." A hush fell. "Child," the word echoed inside Elias like an explosion without sound. His breath catching as reality bent around the impossible. His mind scrambling for logic, biology, sanity. Yet something deep within him stirred. An instinct he didn't know he possessed. A fierce warmth that burned through shock and fear alike. "She is healthy?" Liara said softly, a hand resting protectively over her abdomen. A gesture so unmistakably universal that no translator was required. "And she carries both our worlds within her." The admirals argued louder now, warnings of destabilization, of precedent, of species panic, but Elias barely heard them. His focus locked on Liara's eyes, searching for regret, for resentment, for accusation. He found none, only fear and hope, tangled so tightly they could not be separated. The coalition delayed, as bureaucracies always did, calling emergency sessions, requesting time, but the L3 fleet did not retreat. It simply maintained position, a silent reminder that some laws were enforced by patience rather than guns. Elias was escorted from the command deck under guard, not as a prisoner, but not as a free man either. The corridors felt narrower now, heavier, as if the ship itself questioned his place within it. In a private chamber overlooking the stars, Liara awaited him. No guards, no advisors, just the quiet hum of the warship and the vastness beyond the viewport. "I never wanted this," she said before he could speak, her composure finally cracking. "My people were destroyed because of laws, because of how others interpreted them. I swore I would never let another law take something from me." Elias swallowed, every word he had rehearsed dissolving under the weight of her honesty. "You should have told me," he said gently, not accusing, just aching. "I wanted to," she whispered, tears tracing glowing paths down her cheeks. "But humans scare us, Elias, not because of your weapons, but because you choose with your hearts, and the law does not know how to stop that." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. "I don't regret it," he finally said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Whatever this means, whatever comes next, I don't regret caring." Liara looked at him then as if he had said something revolutionary, something dangerous. "That is why this child matters," she said, placing his hand over her own, over the faint warmth beneath. "She is not a weapon, not a symbol. She is proof that compassion can cross what law cannot." The ship trembled suddenly, not from attack, but from the arrival of additional vessels. Coalition reinforcements warping in at the edge of sensor range. Steel meeting inevitability. "This will not end quietly," Liara said, resolve hardening. There are those who will see her as a threat, and those who will try to claim her power. Elias straightened, soldier instincts awakening beneath the fear. Then they'll have to go through me, he said. Liara smiled sadly. Knowingly, you are already claimed, she replied. By bond, by fate, and soon by battle. Outside the viewport, fleets aligned like storm clouds gathering before an inevitable clash, and somewhere within Liara, a child grew, unaware that her very existence was rewriting the destiny of two civilizations. The waiting became its own kind of torture. Hours stretched thin as fleets drifted in silent alignment, warships facing one another across the void like predators circling an unseen wound. Every sensor locked, every weapon armed yet unfired, the kind of stillness that made even veteran soldiers uneasy. Elias remained aboard the coalition vessel, officially under diplomatic protection, unofficially the most dangerous variable in the sector. Whispers followed him through corridors, some fearful, some angry, some quietly awed. A human soldier whose single act of compassion had triggered ancient forces no one fully understood. Liara was no longer simply a refugee or survivor. She had become something mythic, a princess returned from presumed extinction, carrying a child born of convergence, a phenomenon most species knew only through fragmented records and half-forbidden texts. Among the Elthari, convergence was spoken of in reverent tones, a once-in-millennia event when two compatible souls bridged biology and intent, creating offspring capable of inheriting more than genetics. They inherited resonance, the ability to exist between cultures, laws, even realities. The coalition archives were thinner, sanitized, vague references buried under diplomatic language, warnings labeled obsolete, dismissed as superstition by modern analysts who had never stood face-to-face with an Elthari warship. Elias spent long hours alone, staring out at the stars, wrestling with emotions that refused to settle, fear for what was coming, anger at being pulled into something so vast without choice, and beneath it all, a growing attachment he could no longer deny. He felt her even when she wasn't near, an awareness that pulsed like a quiet signal beneath his thoughts. Not words, not commands, just a sense of connection, as if part of him now existed somewhere else, somewhere softer and infinitely more fragile. Liara felt it too, stronger, sharper. The bond amplifying her already heightened senses, the child within her acting like a living conduit, drawing echoes from Elias that made sleep difficult and waking unbearable. She retreated inward, consulting ancient memory crystals salvaged from her people's ruins, each one a repository of voices long dead, queens and scholars and guardians who spoke of convergence not as miracle or curse, but as responsibility. One voice returned again and again, an elder whose image flickered like starlight trapped in glass. When two worlds meet within one life, the galaxy will try to tear them apart, not from malice, but from fear. Liara closed her eyes as the truth of it settled deeper. Fear was already spreading, among coalition senators, among border worlds, among factions who saw power where she saw a child. Requests arrived, veiled demands cloaked in polite language, proposals for relocation, for observation, for containment, each one stripping a little more agency away. Elias was summoned repeatedly for questioning, medical scans, psychological evaluations designed to quantify what could not be measured. Doctors whispered about hybrid viability, about unknown neural patterns, about anomalies in his own physiology that had not existed weeks before. "You're changing?" one physician admitted quietly, fear and fascination warring in their eyes. "We don't know how or why." Elias almost laughed. If only they knew how much he felt it too, strength that came too easily, reflexes sharpened beyond training, emotions hitting deeper and cleaner, as if something within him had been unlocked rather than altered. The first true fracture came without warning. A coalition patrol vessel exploded on the edge of the formation, torn apart by precision fire traced back to an unidentified craft, sleek, angular, neither Elthari nor coalition design. Panic rippled through both fleets, weapons powered up, targeting arrays flared, seconds from mutual annihilation. A third party, Liara felt it instantly, a cold pressure brushing against her thoughts. Invasive, curious, wrong. "They are watching her," she whispered, gripping her abdomen as pain flared briefly then faded. "Not to protect, to harvest." Elias didn't hesitate, requesting immediate access to Liara despite protocol screaming against it. Something inside him roaring that distance was no longer acceptable. When they stood together again, no guards, no barriers, the air between them seemed to hum, the bond no longer subtle, no longer ignorable. "You feel it too," Liara said, not asking. "Yeah," Elias replied, voice rough. "And I don't like it." She reached out, placing his hand over hers once more, grounding him, grounding herself, the warmth beneath stronger now, unmistakable, alive. "There are forces older than the coalition," she said softly. "Older than even my people. They believe convergence creates keys, beings capable of opening paths they have been locked out of for centuries." Elias met her gaze, understanding dawning with grim clarity. "And our kid is one of those keys." Liara nodded, eyes shining with fierce resolve and quiet terror. "They will come," she said. "Not with diplomacy, but with silence, with shadows." Outside, unidentified ships slipped through sensor nets like ghosts, and across the fleets, fingers tightened on triggers, alliances strained, fear sharpening into something far more dangerous. Elias squared his shoulders, soldier, protector, something more than human now. "Then we don't wait," he said. "We make them afraid to touch what's ours." Liara smiled then, not gently, not sadly, but with the fire of a princess who had lost everything and refused to lose again. And in the space between heartbeats, destiny shifted, preparing the galaxy for a battle no treaty could prevent. The first shots of the hidden war were never announced. They came as failures, as silence where signals should have been, as ships that stopped responding without debris or heat signatures, erased as if they had never existed. Coalition Command called it interference, L3 Seers called it shadow predation, Elias called it hunting. He felt it in his bones before anyone confirmed it, a pressure like gravity tightening around his spine, instincts screaming that the rules had changed, that the battlefield was no longer the void outside but the fragile space between Liara and the child she carried. Liara collapsed during a council session, not from weakness, but from overload. The child reacted violently to a presence none of the scanners could isolate. Her body arched as light rippled beneath her skin in geometric patterns that made even L3 elders recoil. Elias caught her before she hit the floor. The moment their skin touched the bond flared white-hot. A surge of sensation ripping through him, images flooded his mind, star maps folding into themselves, corridors of darkness threaded with light, voices whispering in languages that felt older than sound. He saw the twist then, not as a theory, not as prophecy, but as truth. The child was not only a convergence, she was an anchor. Liara gasped as Elias steadied her, eyes wide with realization mirroring his own. "She is stabilizing something?" Liara whispered, terror and awe breaking through her composure. "The bond isn't just between us, it's holding a fracture closed." The elders froze, memory crystals flaring to life unbidden, projecting fragmented histories they had buried for survival. Long ago, before empires, before law, there had been a war not for territory but for reality itself. Entities that existed between dimensions had tried to cross fully into the galaxy, tearing space apart in the process. Convergence children had been created as living seals, bridges, and locks at once. Most were sacrificed, some went mad, a few survived and vanished, becoming myths blamed for miracles and catastrophes alike. The twist settled like a blade in Elias's chest. This wasn't about politics or heritage or fear of hybrids. The child was the reason the shadows were moving. They weren't hunting power. They were trying to reopen what she was unconsciously keeping closed. Before command could respond, the attack came from inside. Coalition security units turned their weapons simultaneously, eyes glassy, movements synchronized, firing not to kill but to disable shields and navigation, a precision that reeked of external control. Liara screamed as pain lanced through her again, the child reacting to the breach, light bursting from her palms in arcs that bent gravity. Elias didn't think, he moved, human reflex amplified by something far greater now, disarming soldiers without lethal force, dragging Liara toward an escape corridor as alarms howled in layered harmonies. The corridor tore open ahead of them, not blasted, but folded, space peeling back like fabric to reveal a void threaded with impossible geometry. A voice poured through the tear, not spoken, but imposed. Return the anchor, and the fracture will close gently, resist, and all worlds will bleed. Liara shook violently, fighting the pull, her body the only thing keeping the tear from widening further. Elias planted his feet, gripping her with everything he had, rage and love and fear fusing into something incandescent. She is not a tool, he roared into the void. She's a child. The response was immediate. Pressure slammed into him. Memories peeled back layer by layer, training, childhood, first kill, last laugh. The entity probing for weakness, for leverage. It found none that would make him let go. Instead it recoiled, surprised. Human resistance was not supposed to look like this. The big twist landed in that recoil. Elias was not just bonded, he was compatible, uniquely so, his neural patterns resonating with the child's stabilizing field, not amplifying it but completing it. He wasn't the variable they had miscalculated. He was the missing half of the seal. Liara felt it too, clarity, snapping into place as the pain eased slightly. You were never claimed by law alone, she breathed, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. You were chosen by function. The tear began to shrink as Elias pulled Liara back, the child's light shifting from chaotic to focused, threads of brilliance weaving themselves into the fracture like stitches closing a wound. The shadow screamed then, not in anger, but in loss, retreating as space snapped violently back into place, leaving scorched bulkheads and stunned silence behind. Coalition soldiers collapsed, freed from control. Fleets outside scrambled in confusion as sensors finally registered the anomaly fading. Elias sank to his knees, holding Liara as she trembled, the enormity of what had nearly happened settling into the quiet aftermath. This changes everything, Liara said softly, awe and dread entwined. Elias nodded, staring at his hands, still glowing faintly. Yeah, he replied, voice steady despite the storm inside. And now they know we won't give her up. Far beyond the fleets, something ancient withdrew to lick its wounds, not defeated, but aware now that the seal was no longer fragile. It was defended, and destiny, once passive, had just taken a side. The aftermath did not bring peace, it brought attention, and attention in the galaxy was far more dangerous than open war. Within hours, sealed channels ignited across star systems. Ancient sensors reactivated, forgotten watchers stirred. The brief flare of impossible energy recorded during the fracture event rippling outward like a beacon no one could pretend they hadn't seen. Worlds that had never cared about L3 remnants suddenly remembered old debts, old fears, old prophecies. Coalition command fractured under the strain. Some factions demanded immediate containment. Others called for extermination protocols under emergency clauses written for threats that challenged reality itself. Votes split, alliances cracked, and for the first time in centuries the coalition charter itself was questioned openly. The L3 fleet tightened formation around Liara's carrier, ceremonial vessels repositioning into defensive geometry designed not just for battle, but for resonance shielding, patterns meant to confuse entities that did not fully exist in normal space. Elias stood at the center of it all, no longer treated as a soldier, no longer fully human in the eyes of those watching. Medical scans were suspended not because answers were found, but because results contradicted too many accepted limits. His presence stabilized the child, that much was undeniable. Whenever he was near Liara, the ambient distortions softened. The ship's systems hummed more smoothly. The ever-present sense of pressure eased just enough to let people breathe. That made him invaluable, and therefore expendable. The first formal ultimatum arrived encoded in 13 legal dialects, signed by 7 major powers and backed by threat projections so catastrophic they were almost theoretical. Surrender the anchor for controlled separation and universal stabilization. Refusal will be interpreted as an act of existential aggression. Liara read it once, then deleted it without ceremony. They still think she's an object, she said quietly, fingers resting over her abdomen as the child shifted, responding not to danger now, but to emotion. Elias felt anger surge, sharp and protective, but beneath it something colder formed, clarity born of battlefield experience. They're not wrong about one thing, he said, voice low. The stakes are bigger than us. Liara met his gaze, searching for doubt, finding resolve instead. And yet you're still here, she said. I'm still here, he confirmed. The danger escalated when the shadows returned, not with subtle probing this time, but with coordinated strikes across multiple sectors. Trade lanes collapsed into null zones. Colonies lost entire orbital rings. Stars dimmed temporarily, as if something massive had passed between them and the light. Panic spread faster than truth. Worlds blamed each other. Ancient rivalries reignited, and everywhere the same whispered theory emerged. It began when the Convergence child was born. Elias watched the reports scroll past, each one heavier than the last. Understanding settling like armor around his heart. They're forcing a choice, he said. Liara nodded, tears shining but unfallen. They want the galaxy desperate enough to offer her willingly. The coalition called an emergency summit, neutral ground, maximum security. All major powers demanded representation, and against every instinct Elias was ordered to attend. Not as a witness, but as a deterrent, his presence alone now enough to discourage certain actions. The chamber was vast, circular, designed to imply equality while concealing power. Delegates from 100 species stared openly, fear, fascination, hostility blending into a volatile mix, a projection of the fracture. Event replayed above them, slowed, magnified, analyzed. Elias watched himself on the recording, saw the moment his resonance locked with the child's field, saw the tear recoil, gasps echoed. This is unsustainable, one delegate declared, mandibles clicking sharply. You are asking us to risk all existence for one life. Elias stepped forward before Liara could respond, every eye snapping to him. You're already risking it, he said evenly, by pretending sacrifice is control. Murmurs rippled. Another delegate leaned forward, voice silk over steel. Then what do you propose, human? Elias didn't hesitate. You stop hunting shadows with fear, he said. You fortify the seal instead of tearing at it. And you accept that protecting one child may be the only reason you still have a galaxy to argue over. Silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable. Then the attack came, not from shadows, but from desperation. A radical coalition splinter detonated a null charge beneath the chamber, attempting to collapse the space entirely. Reasoning that if the anchor ceased to exist, so would the fracture. Liara screamed as pain tore through her, the child reacting violently, reality bending under the stress. Delegates thrown from their seats as gravity twisted. Elias reached her in an instant, the bond flaring brighter than ever, anchoring not just Liara, but the chamber itself, the collapse halting inches from annihilation. The cost was immediate. Across the galaxy, stars flickered again, stronger this time, the shadows howling in triumph, sensing weakness, sensing division. Elias felt it then, a truth he hadn't wanted to name. Every time the child was forced to stabilize a fracture, the strain echoed outward, the seal holding, but thinning. Liara clutched him, voice breaking. They are tearing the galaxy apart to prove they're right. Elias held her, eyes hardening as resolve crystallized. Then we stop reacting, he said. We go on the offensive. Far beyond known space, ancient entities shifted, alarmed not by the child alone anymore, but by the human who stood willingly between fate and oblivion. Because the galaxy had just learned something terrifying. The anchor was not alone, and if pushed far enough, humanity would choose to fight for one life, even if it meant rewriting the fate of everything. The decision to move first rippled outward like a shockwave, not through weapons fire, but through alignment. L3 warships shifted into ancient formations unseen for generations. Coalition fleets hesitated, then fractured as captains chose conscience over command, fear over obedience, destiny over orders. Elias felt the shift immediately, a tightening and then a release in the pressure around his thoughts, as if the galaxy itself had leaned closer to listen. They relocated to the cradle point, an ancient dead system marked on no modern star map, a place the L3 called the Quiet Scar, where long ago the first fracture had nearly torn reality open, where convergence children had been born, fought over, and lost, Liara stood at the observation window as the fleet assembled around them, hands trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of memory flowing through her blood. "My people died here," she said softly. "Not all at once, but piece by piece, guarding something no one thanked them for." Elias stepped beside her, close enough that the child's presence steadied both of them. "They won't die alone this time," he said. The plan was simple in structure and impossible in execution. Draw the shadows fully into real space, force them to commit instead of circling, then seal the fracture permanently, not with sacrifice but with balance. Elias was the balance. The truth of it settled into him without fear now. His bond with the child no longer a mystery but a purpose. His human unpredictability anchoring what alien precision could not, emotion reinforcing structure, choice reinforcing law. As the fleets entered the quiet scar, space itself reacted, stars dimming, light bending inward, sensors screaming warnings no one bothered to silence. The shadows arrived in force, tearing through the veil like wounds opening all at once, vast shapes pressing against reality. Not ships, not beings, but intentions given form. The child cried out, a sound that was both infant wail and harmonic resonance. Waves of energy rippling outward, stabilizing space even as it strained to break. Liara collapsed to her knees, pain racking her body as the strain peaked, her hand clawing for Elias. He caught her, lowering them both to the deck as alarms blurred into background noise. "I can't hold her much longer," Liara gasped, tears streaming freely now. "They're too many." Elias closed his eyes, reaching inward instead of outward, embracing what he was instead of resisting it. He felt earth then, rain on concrete, laughter after loss, hands reaching out in defiance of despair, the stubborn human refusal to surrender meaning. To surrender meaning to inevitability. He felt Liara's grief, centuries of loss compressed into one fragile life, the fierce love already burning for a child not yet born, and he felt her, the child. Not words, not thoughts, but intention. A simple truth shining brighter than any star. She did not want to be a seal or a weapon or a sacrifice. She wanted to live. Elias opened his eyes, light spilling from him not violently, but steadily, a resonance expanding outward, threading through the child's field, reinforcing rather than draining it. "Listen to her," he shouted into the void, voice carried by something far greater than sound. "She is not your gate." The shadows recoiled, confusion rippling through their vast forms. "What is she then?" They pressed, curiosity laced with hunger. Elias held Liara tighter, grounding himself in her warmth, in her trust. "She is proof," he said. "That reality doesn't need to break to grow." The convergence peaked, light and darkness colliding not explosively, but harmonically, patterns forming that no one had ever recorded. A new structure emerging where the fracture had been, not a scar, but a living weave. One by one, the shadows were forced fully into form, stripped of abstraction, vulnerable, exposed to a reality they had never fully accepted. L3 weapons fired then, not in anger, but in precision, coalition ships following suit, humanity's war doctrine blending with alien resonance. Battle erupting across the quiet scar in a storm of light and resolve. Elias stayed kneeling amid it all, anchor and shield, sweat and tears blurring his vision as the strain mounted. Liara cupped his face, her touch grounding, her eyes fierce and loving. "If we survive this," she whispered, "nothing will ever be the same." He smiled through the pain. "It never was," he replied. The child's cry shifted then, not distress, but something closer to laughter. A resonance that rippled outward and locked the weave into place, sealing the fracture not by force, but by choice. The shadows screamed, unraveling as their access collapsed, retreating or disintegrating as reality rejected them. Silence fell slowly, painfully earned. Elias slumped forward as the light faded, consciousness slipping. The last thing he felt Liara's arms around him, her voice breaking as she called his name, and in the quiet between heartbeats, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if the human who chose love over law would rise again. Elias woke to quiet, not the heavy silence of loss, but the gentle kind that follows survival, the hum of systems stabilizing, the distant murmur of voices speaking softly as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Light filtered through the viewport in slow waves, stars steady again, no longer bending or dimming, just existing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the galaxy did not feel like it was about to tear itself apart. Liara was there, seated beside him, eyes red from crying yet glowing with a warmth that made his chest ache. Her hand resting over his heart as if she were reminding herself he was real. "You scared me," she whispered, voice breaking into a soft laugh through tears. He tried to speak and failed, throat tight, emotions too heavy for words, so he did the only thing that felt right. He reached for her hand. The bond stirred gently, no longer a roaring force, but a calm presence, steady and reassuring, like a promise finally kept. "You held?" Liara said, awe still coloring her tone. "The weave stabilized because you stayed." Elias exhaled slowly, memories returning in fragments. The light, the shadows unraveling, the child's resonance shifting from strain to joy. "How is she?" he asked, fear flickering despite everything. Liara smiled, radiant and exhausted, guiding his hand to her abdomen, where warmth pulsed softly beneath his touch. Stronger now, clearer, unmistakably alive. "She is sleeping," Liara said, "and dreaming. The healers say her field has settled into something new, permanent." The galaxy felt it too. Reports flowed in quietly at first, then with growing certainty, fracture points across known space sealed completely, trade lanes reopened, stars stabilized, and the whispers of shadow faded into myth once more. The coalition reconvened not in panic this time, but in humility, charters rewritten, emergency clauses dissolved, and for the first time in its history, a single life was formally recognized as worthy of protection above strategic advantage. They called it the Accord of the Living Weave. Liara stood before them days later, no longer a refugee, no longer a symbol, but a queen acknowledged by right of survival, flanked not by guards, but by allies who had chosen to stand rather than calculate. Elias stood beside her, not in uniform, not as a soldier, but as himself, a human who had refused to let love be reduced to law. There were consequences, there always were. Borders shifted, power balances changed, and humanity was no longer seen as merely adaptable or violent, but as something far more dangerous and far more valuable. A species that would choose one child over an entire galaxy's fear. The shadows never returned, not because they were destroyed, but because the door they needed no longer existed, sealed not by sacrifice, but by connection, by the simple truth that reality was stronger when it was allowed to care. The child was born beneath a quiet sky, in a chamber filled with light that did not hum or strain, but breathed, her cry soft, curious, and utterly human in its insistence on being heard. She had Liara's eyes, luminous and deep, and Elias's stubborn grip, fingers curling around his with surprising strength. They named her Alia, a name that meant bridge not between worlds but between choices. As she grew, the bond did not dominate her, it guided. She walked between cultures effortlessly, laughed in halls once filled with fear, and where she stepped, systems stabilized, not because she forced them to, but because she reminded them how to exist together. Elias never returned to combat, but he trained others now, not just soldiers but diplomats, engineers, explorers, teaching them what he had learned the hard way, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear decide who deserved to live. Liara rebuilt her people not as an empire, but as stewards, guardians of places where the galaxy grew thin, not rulers but witnesses. Years later, as Elias stood beneath unfamiliar stars with Liara beside him and their daughter racing ahead, laughter echoing through a world once scarred by fractures, he felt the bond pulse softly, content, complete. "We changed fate," Liara said, watching Alia chase firelight across the grass. Elias shook his head, smiling. "No," he replied. "We chose it." And somewhere in the vast quiet beyond known space, destiny, long accustomed to being feared, finally learned what it meant to be held.